So someone sent me this video about the 66-yard field goal, and someone presumably showing how it is impossible to break this particular record. And so I figured I would react to this video and see how it goes. And let's start.
Tucker's ready. There's the snap. Spot down. Kick on the way.
It is really an amazing kick. And it's even more amazing because it hits the post and it goes forward. It's just, really, pretty cool.
This is it. The pinnacle of human achievement. A kicker hitting a now NFL record 66-yard field goal.
I wouldn't call that a pinnacle of human
achievement.
achievement.
Never happen again. Well, the Lions losing in heartbreaking fashion will happen again. I'm talking about the kick. This huge boot took down a mark that stood for 8 years. However, this one will stand forever, and I have math and science to back that up. All that's coming up right after this.
Okay, so my first reaction is, he has science in all caps in the title. That seems very clicky to me. And again, never in the title. And saying, oh, I have math and science to back this up is nothing that a mathematician or a scientist would really say. They would say, there are certain principles that might be at work. I'm kind of curious to see how this record is unbreakable. But my first indication feels like it's blowing something up that it may not be able to support. And then they go into some advertisements, and let's go into the kick.
Before we can understand how this record will not be broken, we have to break down how it was set. Justin Tucker lines up for the opportunity of a lifetime, and when the ball is snapped, he takes a tiny crow hop to help his forward momentum. He lines up on the ball perfectly. His entire momentum is going into the kick.
He really is an amazing kicker.
Right leg extended to the max and locked in. The ball travels 66 yards in 3.83 seconds. That's 35 miles an hour. At an estimate.
Okay, just saying that's the forward distance. So 66 yards is the forward distance, but that isn't the speed that the actual ball was kicked at. So he makes the claims like, oh, this is 35 miles an hour. That's really fast. But if you take into consideration the fact that this ball went up, and it went up for half of the 0.8 seconds, and then comes back down, there's actually a significant vertical speed. So a quick calculation puts that at about 19 meters per second. Horizontal speed of the 15 0.8 meters per second, which is 35 miles an hour. If you combine those two, because then we have about 54 miles an hour, pretty close. So that's actually a lot more impressive that the ball actually went out for 54 miles an hour on the kick.
Estimated launch angle of about 29 degrees. It hits the front of the crossbar.
Okay. So the estimated launch angle is 29 degrees. Now, I imagine that the air friction would probably play a significant role here, and I'm not going to go through that calculation. But without air friction, given those numbers in terms of the speed, you can find that the angle of launch is about 40. So the fact that the estimated launch angle is about 30 probably is taken into consideration air friction, and someone must have measured that from a nice side angle of the kick.
Continues on into NFL history. There it is. 6 feet further than the previous record. Perfection that will never be replicated. Now we'll break down why all those numbers I just said are so important, with a little help from a video by Mark Rober.
Hit it! Go, baby, go!
Okay, now we get the math.
Let's look at the probabilities of why the record won't be broken. Then we'll get into the science. Instead of looking at made field goals from the past, let's look at the longest attempts in history. Spoiler alert, they all end badly. This one to me is amazing. Sebastian Janikowski attempting
76
a
yards,
76
sure.
yarder. This one didn't even make the goal line. Oh, here's another one by former record holder Matt Prater that happens moments before Tucker broke his very own record. Real quick, can we all laugh in Jaguar right now? Here's the math. More kicks over 50 plus yards are being made than ever before. In fact, 106 of them were hit in 2020. The problem with that, NFL kickers miss from over 50 yards, 37% of the time. Would you get on a plane that crashes that much? Or root for a team that only wins that much? Sorry, Jets fans.
All right, so that to me is irrelevant because, and it would be interesting to see if there's data on field goal attempts in the past and what the percentage of completions is, so of success, because I would guess that currently the 37% past 50 yards is probably higher than it was in the past, and that that one has better training for kicking, one can select for kickers. The coaches are a little bit more likely to do a long kick and so on. That would be my guess. It would be interesting to see if there's any data on that. As it's stated, it doesn't really say all that much. I mean, 37% is actually a decent amount, given that if you look at the percentage of 2-point conversions, or you look at the percentage of just plays that complete. I mean, it seems kind of silly. And if we want to essentially cross sports, look at the batting percentages of any professional batter. I mean, it's well below 37%. So his analogies really just don't work very well. At best, you'd say that the record is unlikely given what he's given so far. So maybe there's more to this.
Last year's longest field goal, 61 yards by Jason Myers. Guess what? That was the only one hit over 60 yards. The point is, coaches don't really trust their kickers over 50 yards, and with good reason. And 60-yard kicks, they are rare. Really rare. Only 10 were attempted last season, 3 of those over 65. That's only 0.33% of all 915 field goal attempts that were even tried in 2020. And not one of those over 65 hit. And as we saw earlier, the consequences of missing a field goal that long are dire. You either give up a TD or the ball in your own territory. Maybe you get lucky with a bad return. Newsflash, the field goal unit comprises fat guys who can't tackle. That's what makes Tucker's kick so unique.
All right, so a couple of things. First of all, if it turns out that people can start kicking longer field goals, then maybe they will make their field goal team a little bit better. So we have this nice little feedback loop that could happen. I don't see the rarity of it, and he's actually incorrect there in the sense that he has to include this one success. In all of these cases, there is at least one. And maybe, let's imagine one could follow this logic, say, okay, I'm going to forecast how many NFL games there are going to be for the next 100 years, say. And that will include so many field goal attempts at various lengths, and we can look at the probabilities of having some kind of success at 66 or 70 or whatever it happens to be. So one could figure out those probabilities. He doesn't seem to be doing this. He's just simply saying, wow, it's really rare. But one, these are going to be rare. It also feels a little bit like looking at all the people who have failed to accomplish an Olympic medal and looking at all those failed attempts. This record is never going to get broken because everything is rare, and to me, this logic doesn't seem to hold up at all. Okay, continue.
Circumstance. It happened at the end of the game while the Ravens were trailing, so missing it didn't matter as time would have expired anyways. The Ravens were desperate, and only necessity would even allow a coach to try that kick. More importantly, it was Justin Tucker. Most kickers in the league don't have a career long of over 60, and few are as trusted as Legatron. You're not going to even attempt that kick with Young Wei Koo or that kicker who named himself the Money Badger. That guy kind of sucks. So mathematically, just attempting the 66-yarder was extremely rare, and nothing is going to change that. Now, let's look at the physical limitations any would-be record breaker would face.
Okay, so he says nothing's going to change that. They're rare. Yeah, okay, they're rare, but the amount that they're rare could easily change. If it seemed that you could get a decent percentage, past 50, you might be trying more, and that can happen. So I don't buy that nothing can change that fact. Yeah, they're always going to be rare, but so is nearly any play in the NFL. So that doesn't really sway me at all. So now let's look at the sciences. So here is where I think one could really have, could possibly make a solid case if you can demonstrate there are certain physical limitations of muscles in terms of the amount of force, amount of speed, and so on, the mass of a person, and that gives you a maximum momentum that could possibly be given. And you could say, okay, that's going to give us a limit of certain number of yards. So let's see if that's how it plays out.
Earlier, I mentioned a video by Mark Rober that was going to help us break this down. Ironically, it features the previous record holder, Matt Prater, in which they use a machine to kick field goals really far. In the vid, Prater keeps moving back further and further and actually hits a 65-yarder. It's also ironic that it was filmed in Detroit. But then they move back to a 70-yard attempt. And even with no crowd, no snap, a perfect hold, etc., he can't hit a single one of them. It appears there seems to be a physical boundary. This video by Wired, though it's about baseball.
All right. Okay. So that's a ludicrous argument. The previous record holder who never kicked past 66 can't kick past 66. To me, that seems kind of a silly argument. And the second thing is said, like, here we have a case where we don't have the crowd and we don't have you're not in the game, you don't have the snap and so on. Is there any possible reason you could imagine how something like being in the game might actually give you more power? And I could easily see that. The adrenaline of the crowd, it's a totally different dynamic. So doing it although it's nice to see it in a controlled setting, it's really not the setting that might actually give you the possibility of having that record-breaking performance. So that argument, and just to say that this guy has a certain limit, therefore it's a human physical limit, that seems rather silly to me.
Baseball talks about the physical limitations that a baseball player has when approaching the record for fastest pitch.
There are more injuries, and part of the problem is that more pitchers are throwing at top velocity and constantly throwing at top velocity, and the body can only take so much.
And they conclude that it's physically impossible to throw a 110-mile-an-hour fastball. The same applies to kickers. There is a physical limitation to how far a kicker can kick, and it's not just striking the sweet spot on the ball nor the launch angle. It's the ligaments in the leg. Yes, I said ligma. Need more evidence? Here's Justin Tucker himself missing a 67-yarder in the Pro Bowl. Let's go back to launch angle because this is actually really important.
Okay, so let's, before we get into launch angle, basically saying the human body has some limitation. Okay. But we don't know what that limitation is. So how can you say that 66 yards is the limitation? Maybe it's 67. Maybe it's 68. Maybe it's 70. Who knows, right? I mean, it's just that, it's hard to imagine that one more yard would actually be the limit. That to me seems less likely.
In Mark Rober's video, he states the ideal launch angle for a kick is 40 degrees. But by my estimation, using markers on the field as a guide, Tucker's kick goes off at around 28 to 30 degrees. That's much lower than 40, obviously, but it's a testament to how freakish this one kick is. Usually.
All right. Okay. So this is an odd argument because, well, one is he's actually trying to draw the angle from a side view, and I don't really trust it, and it could be, somewhat higher. I would hope that he would have actually used someone who measured the angle from the side where you'd actually get that. But let's say it's less than 40, less than the maximum. So his argument is somehow that this is the absolute limit with a kick that is kicked below the optimal angle. So if everything happened exactly the same and he had kicked it at the 1 or 2 degrees higher, it would have gone past the goalpost, and it would have and it wouldn't even hit the post. So how can you make the claim that this is a limit, that this is somehow never going to be broken, when the record holder has, by this guy's admission, kicked at the non-optimum angle? Now, you might say that like the situation to kick at the right angle might be rare, but it argues against actually his point that it will never happen again, or that there is an actual physical limit that has been met with this kick.
Usually low launch angles on long attempts go into the line or get blocked, but you can see that Detroit got their hands up well to the side of the kick and wisely didn't send anyone in to try and block it. Dan Campbell was convinced, like everyone else, that there was no freaking way this kick was going through. Should have stopped that 4th and 19, Dan. And let's circle back to something crucial we saw at the beginning of the video. The kick hits the freaking crossbar. Out of all the things to go right, this one is the most crucial. Tucker had to extend his leg through the ball perfectly, hit the ball at the perfect place 2 inches above the ground, then get the launch angle just right so it didn't hit a blocker or his own line.
This seems like post hoc rationalization.
To get there, and after every obstacle in the kicker's Ninja Warrior course, the ball hits the front of the crossbar and bounces over. Only one part of this is repeatable, Tucker's kicking motion, but the luck part, the sheer audacity to even try the kick, and then have it literally travel the minimum distance to even be a 66-yard field goal, and not doink a la Cody Parkey, well, that means that the football gods absolutely love Justin Tucker.
Well, that last detail is again totally irrelevant. It would only be applicable to the case where you just kick at a minimum. If any of those other things change, like let's say long kicks are made a little bit more common, and we get a kicker who is just as good or maybe just a little bit better than Tucker, then you could get a situation where it passes the crossbar and there's no problem. So that to me is completely irrelevant.
And really hate the Lions.
All right, the haters.
Before we wrap it up, let me address the naysayers who are loosening up their wrists to type in the comment section. You might say one day they will attempt it in the wind or in Denver, etc. Long field goal attempts happen all the time.
It's
possibly, but indoors in a controlled environment is the ideal scenario.
Well, actually, it's not. So that's just not true.
Could cause the
I mean,
ball to
you could
move
have
left
adrenaline,
or right, and more variables that might not help a kicker. But what about the fair catch kick? Says the football equivalent of foolish baseball. Let me explain this weird rule to you. On a punt or a kickoff, a player can call for a fair catch, and the team that catches it can attempt a field goal from the spot.
There's no way that you could get
this is
that kind of distance.
Even better, that kick can come off a tee, and the kicker can get a running start without a chance of it being blocked. Okay, sounds good, except these are rare. Only 26 have ever happened, the last in 2019, and Joey Sly missed a free 60-yarder. Phil Dawson tried one in 2013 from 71 and missed badly. Plus, these are just like a kickoff or field goal. They can be returned. So, no. Now, a real football nerd might bring up the 69-yard field goal in 1976 by Abilene Christian's Ove Johansson. Well, he was wind-aided, was allowed to use a kicking block, and it's rumored that the ball may have been filled with helium.
Well, that would help.
Could have their own
having helium balls, for sure.
And thanks to Tom Brady, none of those shenanigans are ever happening again.
Oh, that's a whole nother issue.
In conclusion,
about bad data.
Justin Tucker's magical kick. It had everything go right, and it still barely made it through. So until they allow robot kicking machines, this record will stand forever. Sorry, Lions fans.
Tucker's ready. There's the snap. Spot down. Kick on the way. It is up and it is off the crossbar and through. Oh my goodness, are you kidding me?
Okay, so anyway, that's my kind of reaction. Mostly, it pretty much seems that the entire argument is these things are rare. People can't do it in controlled settings, and there's some physical limitation for humans, but we have no idea what it is. So. This really is a very weak argument. It also reminds me of the legendary 4-minute mile. In the 1950s, it was deemed by many that it would be impossible, physically impossible, to have a 4-minute mile run, and and people have tried for a long time. There were obviously a number of people who felt there wasn't this limitation, but there were a number of doctors and there were arguments about energy consumption during running and so on that would argue that there was this limit until someone actually broke it. And once someone broke it, then very shortly afterward, there were many other people who ran a 4-minute mile. There was something about calling it impossible kept people from solving it. And then once it was shown it was actually possible, then it became a lot easier. So I don't think that this video gives a very strong case at all that this particular record is a permanent one.